Now, if you're telling me to the book of Ecclesiastes, now, I'm only 50, but I've seen so much change in my life. And I know that some of you who are older, you've seen much more change in your lives. You know, some of you who have lived on this world longer than I have. The amount of change that we've seen is absolutely incredible. It's been such a fast pace. Even in Christian ministry, I have seen so much change. When I first started in ministry, I used to preach 3 times every Sunday, without fail. We'd have the morning service, I would speak there. I would go to an afternoon service at a chapel, 3 o'clock, and I would speak there. And then in the church, I would do an evening service, which was primarily teaching. You know, we would have 1 hour of teaching on a Sunday evening. We'd have a couple of hymns and, stuff like that. And one of the things that I did over 20-odd years ago now was the book of Ecclesiastes. I taught that. I did a verse-by-verse exposition, and it took us about 10 months, it was, to go every Sunday evening, just going verse by verse through the book of Ecclesiastes. It's such a wonderful book. And I haven't brought them with me this morning, but I've still got the notes of what I was speaking about then. And one of the things I said, I predicted, not because I'm a prophet or because it was a prophecy, but just looking at what was happening in society. One of the things I said as I looked at my notes was that in 20 years, I said, stress will be the biggest factor of why people take time off of work. This is where our culture is headed. And back then, stress, if you went to your boss 20, 30 years ago and said, I feel stressed, I need time off, they'll slap you around the face, metaphorically, and tell you to man up, or stuff like that. It just wasn't considered a factor. But now, 20 years later, the biggest cause of why people get off of work is stress. The inability to be able to cope with modern life and the pressures that we see around us. The reason I made that prediction, as I say, was not because I consider myself a prophet or anything like that, but literally as we look at what the book of Ecclesiastes teaches, it teaches us, unless we have the right thinking about life, that basically stress and the foolishness, the stupidity of it all, will actually overburden us. So I'm going to read from Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I'm just going to read 10 verses. So I reflected on all of this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no man knows whether love or hate awaits him. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good man, so with the sinner. So it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of men, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live. Wouldn't that sum up our society today? Think about it, just that one verse there. Our culture, our society, so many countries in the world, that the hearts of men are full of evil and madness. In their hearts while they live, and afterwards they join the dead. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even the memory of them is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. Go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for it is now that God favours what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. See, this is why we don't have to take every verse literally, or else we'd all be dressed in white this morning, wouldn't we? And all have oil on our heads. And so we need to understand the meaning of what the scripture says. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labour under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all of your might. For in the grave where you are going, there is neither working nor planning, nor knowledge nor wisdom. Isn't that a strange passage to read in the Bible? Especially when you look at the whole book of Ecclesiastes. The author is Solomon, traditionally. And he was counselling people, gleaned from his own search for meaning. He was a man who had everything. He had fame, he had wealth, he had hundreds of wives, he had literally was a ruler of an empire. He had everything which you would think a human being would want to give satisfaction and meaning to life. He had it all. If you look at it, you read at the whole book, there was not one thing he had. He had a library of tens of thousands of books with every topic you can imagine. He could go to his library. Now we've got the internet, but just think back then, even in the ancient world. He could go and pick off a book, and he said that he'd read books without end. He had acquired so much knowledge, so much information about everything. But he came to the conclusion, this life is stupid without the knowledge of God. That actually, unless we know who God is, he came to the knowledge that, or the conclusion, that this life is foolish. And so the book of Ecclesiastes is really him giving counsel guided by wisdom that God had given him. He speaks to us about how we can live better lives and balanced lives. And he talks to us, he says that it doesn't matter what we do, there are certain things that we cannot change and certain things that we cannot escape. He said this is the vanity of life. And two such things that he talks about was death and taxes, if you look at it. He said they're two things as human beings we can never escape. We can't escape being taxed by the rulers over us, and we can't escape death. And that is true for us as human beings. The Bible actually teaches us that it's helpful to be aware of our own mortality. That's what he's talking about here, about making the most of the time we have in this world. When we're aware of just how much limited time we have, and we seek the one who has created us, that is actually how we can make the most of our lives. Now let me ask you a question. How many famous people can you name who were alive in 1890? I'm not asking you this to try to, because I wouldn't know unless I'd, read up on it this morning. You could probably say, a handful of people. Who was alive in 1890? Does anybody want to say a couple of names of who might have been alive then? Queen Victoria? Other names? Churchill? Who else? You see? I can tell you some people who were born there. Not because I'm more knowledgeable than you, but because I had the advantage of looking it up this morning. So that's why. Stan Laurel was born in 1890. Laurel and Hardy is about to be a film made about them. Colonel Sanders of KFC fame was born in 1890. Agatha Christie, Dwight D. Eisenhower, the president. These are some names we know. There's other people who died in the year 1890. Vincent van Gogh was one of them. And he died a penniless artist. Now, wouldn't you be fed up if you spent your life penniless, unable to pay your rent, unable to pay your bills, trying to sell your paintings on the street, and nobody wanted to buy them? 10 pence for a painting. Nobody wanted to buy them. You was evicted from your house because you couldn't afford to pay the rent because nobody wanted to buy your paintings. And then, when you died, you go up to eternity, you suddenly see that your paintings become worth billions, priceless. Wouldn't you think, what was the point of it? My goodness, I couldn't even pay my rent and my bills with what I created during this life. And now people are bidding billions for them. They're in galleries and, so forth. I'd actually feel pretty fed up if I was Van Gogh, looking from that side of eternity and thinking, my goodness, I couldn't even pay my bills. But the point is, in the year 1890, there's actually a book that called The Grand Larose. It was published every year of the most influential people alive at that time. And so you could say any year. I've just chosen 1890 just as a random example. But you could do 1891 all the way up, and it was a book of all the most influential people alive. The politicians, the artists, the celebrities. I could name them. You wouldn't even know who they were. I don't even know who they were. As you look at it, and you look at all these names, they were people who everybody who was alive in 1890 was aware of. They were public figures. They were public names. But who, as I say now, over 130, almost 30 years later, 128 years later, who of us can name but one or two of these people? We can't, can we? You see, they're forgotten. Everything they've achieved in life, everything they've done is forgotten. We don't remember them. And that's a lot of what Solomon is actually talking about. He's talking about a life lived without the knowledge and experience of God is ultimately futile. Because although we may forget each other's deeds, the Bible tells us that God doesn't forget what we do in this world. I'm grateful that in my short time on this earth I've discovered who God is. I have read literally tens of thousands of books in my lifetime. I've acquired knowledge on stuff that I could talk to you about some quite random subjects this morning. I could talk to you about the cod wars, because that was a subject I read up on years ago, and I was quite interested about how we as a nation nearly went to war with Iceland over cod fishing. Did you know that? Some of you may do that. We literally almost went to a major war with Iceland over cod fishing grounds. I know a lot about fishing. I can tell you about trawling, angling, drift nets, gill nets, trammel nets, because that was my life as a teenage boy. At the age of 13, I would wake up at 5 o'clock every morning, and I owned a fishing boat. I bought a fishing boat that I paid for by peeling potatoes at a local fish and chip shop. I'd go there every Saturday and I would peel all the potatoes to make the fish and chips. And the money I saved up from that, I bought a fishing boat. And 5 o'clock every morning, before school, I would take the fishing boat out if the weather was good, and I'd lay out my gill nets if it was the summer for herring, or the trammel nets, and I'd go to school, and when I came back home, I would go back and get the nets, bring all the fish in and sell it to the local fishmonger. But the point is, I could tell you everything there is about fishing, but you probably wouldn't be interested. You'd probably get bored if I was talking about it. I could tell you how I became a European angling champion at the age of 13. And do you know how I did it? Knowledge. You see? We had these Vietnamese refugees came to live near us in Hythe, and I became friends with a couple of them. And I had this very sophisticated fishing rod. I had this multiplier reel, and I could really cast out my bait quite far. And they came with kind of this bamboo rod and this tin can and this almost like string, and they was getting it out about 20 or 30 yards further than me. And they were reeling in cod, about 5 to 8 to 10 pound cod. And I was amazed because I wasn't doing it. And I asked them how. I said, what are you doing? They said, well, what we did, we got a mask and snorkel. We've actually done snorkeling all off the coast here. And there's a gully just there that if you actually use the bait and mussel, all the cod come there to feed. So if you get your tackle in there, you can actually catch all of the cod. And so I learnt that. And I went to this fishing competition. And I was bringing in, I brought in about 50 odd pound of cod in this one competition when people 5 yards down from me, 10 yards down from me, they weren't catching a thing. These old men who were really moaning, complaining, really shouting and swearing because rod would go in, bringing in these nice cod. You see, it was understanding, what the ground was. But the whole point I'm making to you this morning is, that's probably not that interesting to you. It's interesting to me, I'm fascinated by it, and that's not what God has called me to talk about, and it's not what God has called us to talk about. God has called us to talk about him. The greatest truth I have discovered in life, and what I am called to you to talk about, is not the knowledge I have about fishing, a philosophy of life or wisdom I feel I might have acquired during my short journey in this world, but that I know who God is. Think about it, and so do you. How arrogant is that for me to stand here and say, I know who God is? The one who created this universe, this creation, I know who he is. That I and you are called to be an ambassador for him. And that is the one great characteristic of being born from above, is that we as Christians, we know who Jesus Christ is. And that is the greatest discovery any single one of us can make in life, that we suddenly know and understand who God is. Think about it. Reflect on that. You have the same experience. You know who God is. You know who Jesus Christ is. He's not just a historical person to us. And let me just read a couple of verses in closing. I'm going to read, these won't come up on the screen, but I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 16, and just listen to the words that Jesus spoke to Peter. Simon Peter, or Jesus said to him, he said, "What about you?" Jesus asked Peter, "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven." Just think on that. The reason I can say that to you this morning, it's not born of human arrogance that I know who God is. The reason you as Christians is not born of your own arrogance that you say we know who God is. It's because he has revealed who he is. I want to read one more verse from the Gospel of Luke, and it's chapter 11. And I'm going to read from verse 17. He says, "Which of you fathers, if your son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?" I just want to leave you with these thoughts this morning. I've not had time, as I say, to go through the whole message of Ecclesiastes. But the whole message is that a life lived without God is pointless. And the essence of Christianity is not a creed or a doctrine, it's illumination. It's seeing who God is as revealed in Jesus Christ. And when we see the light of life, it sets us free, and it's a life-changing revelation. And this is what I want to say to you, and especially to you, Steve, that if you give God the right to lead and guide your life, the most amazing things will happen. That is true for us as a church as well. If we say to God, "Lord, we give you the right to lead us, to guide us," amazing things will happen. And that is true for your life. So say to God, "Lord, lead me, guide me. Where you lead, I'll follow. I trust you." I guarantee you 100% you'll see amazing things happen. I guarantee we, as a church, will see amazing things happen. And that was the word I had for you, Steve, which I say it again, was give thanks to God for everything. What you need, ask him, for he always has your best interests at heart. And that's true for us as well, that he always has our best interests at heart. It's a life of faith, not of intellect and reason, but a life knowing who made us. I'm fascinated that we're sending machines to the dark side of the moon, that we've got spacecraft taking photographs off of the planet Mars. It's absolutely fascinating stuff to me. But actually, we as Christians, we have the greatest knowledge there is, the knowledge of who God is, as revealed in Jesus Christ. You will never cease to be the most amazed person on earth at what God has done for you on the inside when you understand who Christ is, when you understand who it is we walk with. So when we pray, people, look at who it is that we are praying to, not the difficulties. Don't we so often, when we're faced with challenges, we look at the difficulties, we get stressed by it. We have to take time off work because it's crippled us emotionally or mentally through stress. Don't look at the difficulties. Look at the one who says, I've called you to be my children. I've called you to follow me. I have your best interests at heart. When you do what I tell you to do, amazing things will happen. Blessings upon blessings will be poured out upon you, even if not in this life, in that which is to come. When you know who God is, you don't need to be afraid of anything or anybody else. We're not here to prove God answers prayers. We are here to be living monuments of God's grace. So this will be my final words this morning. The greatest knowledge, according to the book of Ecclesiastes, that can be obtained in this world is the knowledge of who God is. We have a greater knowledge than even Solomon had, because he would look forward to what the prophet said about he who would come. We now, as Christians, look at the one who did come, Jesus Christ, the eternal God who created this amazing universe, became a human being, became one of us to teach us, to save us, and to guide us. So even if we have a basic understanding of who Jesus Christ is, we know who the God who created all of these things is, and we know he has our best interests at heart. Let's pray. Lord, so often we look at the difficulties and challenges we as human beings, as Christians, face in this world. Sometimes, Lord, the challenges can dominate our minds. They can invade our emotions. They can torture our hearts. But Lord, you have given us the greatest knowledge that it's possible to obtain. We don't need to be the wisest, most knowledgeable or educated people in this world. But when we know who Jesus Christ is, we have understood the greatest truth there is to understand in this life. That from that viewpoint, we can seek to interpret our own lives, our own days we spend in this world, and the activities we do. We can understand it from an eternal perspective. So Lord, help us to use the days we have on this world wisely. Help us to use this time, Lord, to understand more who you are, and just seek to live according to your wisdom, your guidance, and your plan for us. Lord, I bring your people here before you this morning. You have worked in their lives and through their lives, in some cases for many long decades. Lord, I bring your people before you. Help us to never forget who Jesus Christ is. Help us to realize that whatever we have achieved or felt we have not achieved, or what we want to do in this life, that we have understood the greatest truth there is to know in life when we know who you are. And we know who you are because you have revealed yourself in the person of Jesus Christ. So I bring your people before you, Lord, in his name. Amen.